Hey y'all, I am back with chapter 3 of Will Smith's book, simply entitled Will. And chapter 3 is entitled Performance. So this time around, I decided to pre-record it, and I'm going to be releasing this video as a premiere, as you see now. And that way you guys can chat along and provide your commentary. So like I said, as I've been doing before, I'm going to provide my astrological commentary. You see Will Smith's chart right here as I read along. All right. So sometimes I'll be doing these reading of the chapters live, and other times I'll pre-record it and post it as a premiere video. Okay. Performance. So Sunday morning at Resurrection Baptist Church, and the monotone voice of Reverend Claudius Amaker echoed across old rickety wooden ceilings, raining down the infallible word of God upon us. My grandmother Gigi always dressed up for church. To her, the Sunday presentation of yourself was an intentional act of devotion to the Lord. She wore one of those pristine floral church lady dresses, perfectly accessorized with the church pearls, and the church hat with the giant satin flower pinned to it. During the sermon, she fanned herself, eyes closed, shaking her head in agreement, chiming in, "Preach, Pastor, say it again," or just a simple, mm-hmm. Every once in a while, she would glance down at me, checking to make sure I was paying attention. But I was just 9 years old. There it again, that 9, south node at the 9th degree, north node at the 9th degree. Age 9 was very significant for him. Now people clapped and swayed and cried and prayed. All the while, my 9-year-old mind couldn't help but wonder if this service was ever going to end. Except every third Sunday when the visiting Reverend Ronald West would take the pulpit. Reverend Amaker was our home pastor, and he would talk about the power of God. But all I could hear was the voice of the adults and Charlie Brown. Wah, 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 wah. Reverend West, though, would show you God's power. He wore stylish red Cazal glasses with a matching 3-piece suit, punctuated with the standard bleach white Baptist pocket hanky. He was 6'3", 210 pounds of God's glory. And do not let him near your piano, because after Reverend West played it, you could just wheel that thing out to the trash. Reverend West led the choir. He always started off seated, playing the piano with his left hand, directing the choir with his right, calmly leaning into some slow Mahalia Jackson-style ballad to warm up the elders. This was just the calm before the storm. Slowly, he would transform, allowing the music to carry him into a trance. Tears would fill his eyes, sweat building on his brow, as he rummaged for his hanky to clear the fog from his glasses. The drums, the bass, the voices, all rising at his command, as if imploring the Holy Spirit to show itself. And then, like clockwork, an ecstatic crescendo, and boom, the Holy Ghost fills the room. Reverend West explodes from his seat, kicking over the stool, both hands possessed, banging in praise on the piano. Then with a guttural roar, he blazes across the stage to the 3-tier electric organ, demanding that it do what God intended it to do, swirling massive orchestral Baptist chords, all the while sweat flying, the congregation erupting, singing, dancing, old women passing out in the aisles, weeping, Reverend West pointing, directing, never once losing control of the choir and the band, until his body would collapse in surrender in gratitude for the merciful bliss of God's love. As the music settled, Gigi returned to her seat, dabbing tears from her eyes and my little heart pounding, not even totally sure what that sweet vibration was inside my body. All I could think was, I want to do that. I want to make people feel that. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. It's always been funny to me that the first prayer my grandmother taught me was actually a rap. Gigi was Jesus' homegirl. I've met many people who say that they are religious, but I've never met anyone who lived out Christ's gospel the way my grandmother did. She walked and talked and embodied the example of Christ. This was not a Sunday thing for her. It was a 24/7, 365 thing. Everything she said, everything she did, everything she thought, it was to glorify God. Gigi worked the graveyard shift at the hospital, which allowed both of my parents to maintain full-time jobs. She watched my siblings and me during the day and worked at night. At the young age of 4 or 5, hearing the phrase the graveyard shift filled me with images of ghouls and demons and my superhero grandmother slaying vile creatures just so she could feed me, while I lay in bed safe and sound, caressing the silken edges of my cream-colored puff blankie. I used to beg her, please don't go, Gigi. Please stay here with me. I felt such guilt. My impressionable mind twisted the situation into a sense of personal failure and weakness. The impressionable mind comes from that moon ruling that third house being conjoined to Neptune. I thought, what kind of kid stays in bed while his grandmother has to fight monsters in a graveyard at midnight? It felt as though she was risking her life to protect me. And in some sense, maybe she was, not her life, but what she was certainly sacrificing a big part of herself for me, my siblings, and my parents. One day I'm going to take care of you, Gigi, I said. Oh, thank you, lover boy. That was her nickname for me. One day we were sitting on Gigi's front porch. She was crocheting a sweater, which at some point I was going to be forced to wear, when a homeless woman walked by. Her clothes were filthy. Her face was darkened and haggard, a mix of dirt and sunburn. Her front teeth were missing. And even though she was down on the street, I could smell the pungent reek of urine. I'd never seen a homeless person before. She looked like a witch to me, and I prayed she'd just walk on by. But Gigi stopped her. Excuse me, miss, what's your name? I was horrified. I thought, Gigi, what are you doing? Just let her go. This woman was clearly not used to being asked her name, or at least not recently. She seemed to almost have to remember it. After a long pause, as she sized up my grandmother, she said, Clara. Will, this is Miss Clara, Gigi said, as though they were old friends. With that, Gigi walked down off the porch and put her arm around Clara. I'm Helen, Gigi said, and invited her into the house. My mind was furiously flip-flopping between disgust and terror, but it was about to get way worse. First, they went to the kitchen. Gigi didn't give Miss Clara food that was already prepared in the refrigerator. She cooked her a fresh meal from scratch. While Clara ate, Gigi handed her a robe, took all of her clothes and washed and folded them. Will, Gigi called out. What could she possibly want with me? I thought. Yes, Gigi? Go run Miss Clara a bath. As I think back, this may be the moment where one of my most famous movie catchphrases was born. Oh, hell no, I thought. I ran the bath. Gigi then took Miss Clara upstairs, bathed her with her bare hands, brushed her teeth, and washed her hair. I wanted to scream, Gigi, stop touching that dirty lady. She's going to stink up our bathtub. But I knew better than to say that. They were both about the same size, so Gigi took Clara to her closet and began holding up clothes in front of her in the mirror to see which ones would fit. Miss Clara was gasping with gratitude. Through tears, she kept saying, this is too much, Helen, way too much. Please stop. I don't deserve this. But Gigi wasn't having it. She held both of Clara's hands, gently shaking them to get Clara to look into her eyes. Jesus loves you, and so do I, Gigi said. That was the end of the discussion. Gigi didn't make a distinction between your burdens and her own. She truly believed the message of the gospel. She saw loving and serving others not as a responsibility, but as an honor. I never heard her gripe about working the graveyard shift. Never heard her say a negative word about my father, even though he had beaten her daughter. With her Bible in hand, her arms were open, not only for us, but for everyone. She was joyfully her brothers and sisters' keeper. Gigi was the moral compass that had guided my entire life. She was my conduit to God. If Gigi was happy with me, that meant that God was happy with me. But if she was unhappy, that meant that the universe was displeased. Gigi's approval of me meant that the universe approved of whatever I was doing. In my mind, she had a direct line to God. When she was talking, I felt like I was getting explicit instructions from God. So her approval wasn't simply the adoration of a loving, gentle grandmother. Her approval was how I would access and harness the power and favor of the Lord. Gigi personified my understanding of holiness and divinity. To this day, when I ask myself, what makes a person good, my mind immediately pictures my grandmother. When I sat in those hard wooden pews at Resurrection Baptist as a kid, I didn't understand the meaning of the sermons or the intricacies of scripture, but I got Gigi. She lived as Christ taught her to live. She walked the walk, and through her, I saw God's love. I felt God's love, and that love gave me a sense of hope. Gigi was light. She was illuminated. She illuminated the possibility that life could be beautiful. When I think back to my childhood, I visualize my father, my mother, and Gigi arranged as a philosophical triangle. My father was one side of the triangle, discipline. He taught me how to work, how to be relentless. He instilled in me an ethic that it's better to die than to quit. My mother, education. She believed that knowledge was the irrevocable key to a successful life. She wanted me to study, to learn, to grow, to cultivate a deep and broad understanding, to either know what you're talking about or be quiet. Gigi, love of God. Whereas I tried to please my mother and father so I wouldn't get into trouble, I wanted to please Gigi so that I could bathe in that transcendent ecstasy of divine love. These three ideas, discipline, education, and love, would fight for my attention throughout the rest of my life. Now, the grandmother's influence, his maternal grandmother, can be seen through his seventh house, through Will Smith's seventh house, if you want to take derivative houses into account. So the seventh house would be the 10th house from the 10th, and that would represent his grandmother, his maternal grandmother. And as you can see, Sagittarius is on the 7th, and that's the religion, that's the church. She was taking, she was basically representing her taking him to church and him basically becoming indoctrinated in that religion through his grandmother. Now, Gigi was obsessed with this one Broadway play from the 1960s called Pearly Victorious that was turned into a musical Pearly in 1970. Written by Ossie Davis, it was the story of a Black preacher named Pearly who went down to Georgia, opened a church, and began saving enslaved people from an evil plantation owner. One year, Gigi decided all of the kids at the church had to perform Pearly. We had to learn every word and every song front to back. She would have my siblings and me practice in the living room, record player blaring as we sang and danced along. 40 years later, I could still sing you every song from Pearly. Gigi was always encouraging me to perform. She was the self-appointed head of special events at Resurrection Baptist Church and organized all the Easter recitations, nativity reenactments, the Thanksgiving feeding of the poor, holiday talent shows, post-baptism potluck dinners, and on, you name it, she planned it. As soon as my brother and sisters and I could talk, Gigi had us up in front of the congregation giving a rendition of some biblical something for all to see and enjoy. Both my parents encouraged music as well. We all took piano lessons as kids because my mom played. My brother Harry blew a saxophone badly for a while, and I took drum lessons briefly in middle school, including a thankfully forgettable stint abusing a snare in Our Lady of Lourdes marching band. But the piano was the only instrument that actually liked me. One of the more famous moments on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was the final scene of the pilot, where after an argument with Uncle Phil, he leaves the room and I sit down on the piano bench. I just saw a clip of this the other day. Interesting. The producers had originally planned on me sitting with my back to the piano so they could push the camera in front of my face as I pondered the profundity of Uncle Phil's closing words. But when I sat down, I faced the piano and began playing my mom's favorite Beethoven's Für Elise. James Avery, stunned, stepped back around the corner. The set went silent as everyone realized this show was about to be special. The whole point of the scene had been to never judge a book by its cover. The producers were so inspired by this improvisational moment that they kept it, and it became the defining thematic premise of the entire series. But my greatest piano performance had come a decade earlier. I was 11 years old, and Gigi had organized a children's talent show, followed by an Easter egg hunt in Resurrection Hall. I had been practicing the Morris Albert song's Feelings as a part of my piano lessons. Gigi had made me play it for her every night for a month. Then she sprung it on me. Lover boy, I want you to play this song for everybody at the church on Easter. At the time, it was the only song I knew how to play, and I had never played the piano in front of anybody except my family. Wait, Gigi, no, I can't. I'm not ready, I said. I'm going to mess up the notes. She smiled. Oh, baby, she said, gently caressing my cheek. God doesn't care if you hit the notes right. Gigi had a magical invisible power. She would never apply force, yet no one could resist her overwhelming energy. And so it was that 2 weeks later, I found myself dressed in a cream pinstripe three-piece Easter suit, sitting at the piano in Resurrection Hall, Gigi beaming in the wings, my hands trembling, 200 faces gazing, silence, anticipation, my heart pounding out of my chest. It felt like it wanted to leave, whether I decided to or not. And Gigi gave me the nod. I took a deep breath, somehow found an F, and began. The way the piano was situated on stage, I had eye contact with Gigi the whole time. Morris Albert's Feelings was ringing through Resurrection Hall for an audience of 200 people, but I was only playing for one person. And the look on her face, I still struggled to describe it. The words pride or approval are pale and inadequate. I can only say that I have been chasing that look in the eyes of every woman I've ever loved ever since. I've never felt more certain of someone's adoration. All my career, my performances, my albums, everything has been a relentless, unbroken quest to relive the delicious purity I felt when I played Feelings at Resurrection Hall for my Gigi. I didn't have to do anything different. I didn't have to be anything different. In that moment, just as I was, bum notes and all, I was enough. I began to perform all the time. Whether I was making up skits for my parents or reenacting a movie for my friends or singing at church for Gigi, performance became my little secret oasis of love. It gave me the warmth and affection, but behind the protection of a mask. It was perfect. I could hide myself and be loved at the same time, mitigating the risk of vulnerability, but gaining everything. I was hooked. But it would take me another 40 years before I understood that I had misinterpreted my grandmother's deepest lesson. If I had understood what she was trying to teach me, this book would end right here. But as you can see, there are 19 more chapters. One year during Christmas Eve services, Resurrection Hall, decorated from entry to altar, adorned to a level that even Jesus may have thought was a bit too much, Gigi was peacefully swaying to the choir's soothing rendition of Blessed Assurance. I watched her rock and hum, and I found myself becoming hypnotized by her tranquility. She was not quite smiling, but the soft rise in the corners of her mouth betrayed an invincible serenity. I would later come to recognize this look as the look that people have when they know things the rest of us don't. She caught me staring. Yes, lover boy? Gigi, why are you so happy all the time? I whispered. Now she was fully smiling. She paused like a gardener preparing to sow essential seeds. She leaned over and whispered in my ear, I trust God. And I am so thankful for his grace in my life. I know that every single breath I take is a gift, and it's impossible to be unhappy when you're grateful. He put the sun in the sky and the moon. He gave me you and our whole family. And for all of that, he only gave me one job. What's your job, Gigi? To love and care for all of his children, she said. So everywhere I go, I try to make everything I touch better. Then she reached out and touched the end of my nose. Boop, see? I've been called nigger to my face 5 or 6 times in my life, twice by police officers, a couple of times by random strangers, once by a white friend, but never by anyone who I thought was smart or strong. I once heard some of the white kids at school joke about catch a nigger, kill a nigger day, an apparently well-known holiday in their neighborhoods. Back in the 1900s, some of Philly's white community members would pick a specific day to assault any Black person they saw walking around their neighborhood. 70 years later, some of my Catholic school classmates still thought it was funny to joke about it. But every encounter I've ever had with overt racism was with people I estimated to be weak enemies at best. They always seemed unintelligent, angry, and to me, easily circumvented or defeated. So consequently, overt racism, although dangerous and ever present as an external threat, never made me feel inferior. I was raised to believe that I am inherently equipped to handle any problems that may arise in life, racism included. Some combination of hard work, education, and God would topple any and all obstacles and enemies. The only variable was the level of my commitment to the fight. As I grew older, I started to become more aware of the silent, unspoken, and more insidious forms of prejudice lurking around me. I'd get in more trouble for doing the same things my white classmates would do. I got called on less often, and I felt like teachers took me less seriously. Now, the fact that he's intertwining his school experiences with the rates, that's that Cancer on the third. So a lot of what we're coming across in his book is very much tied to Cancer on the third. He said, I spent most of my childhood straddling and navigating two cultures, my Black world of home and the neighborhood, Resurrection Baptist and Daddy-O's shop, and the white word of school. The white world of school, Catholic Church, and the prevailing culture of America. I went to an all-Black church, lived on an all-Black street, and grew up playing with mostly other Black kids. But at the same time, I was one of only 3 Black children attending Our Lady of Lourdes, the local Catholic K through 8. So the Catholic school church, or the Catholic school, basically, again, that's that Cancer on the third. That's where the race is coming in. But then he has Moon conjoined to Neptune in the 6th, which is the epitome of attending a parochial school, namely Catholic, because of that 6th house influence, because 6th house deals with rituals, and the Catholic Church is all about rituals. All right, where am I at? At school, it was impossible to not feel like an outcast. Again, we go back to that Moon conjoined to Neptune. Neptune is the planet of the outcast, with the moon ruling the 3rd house. 3rd house is school. You can also see with his Gemini rising, basically, and then squaring that Mars in Virgo, that could show that he had a hard time being fully integrated into his school setting. Also, the integration theme is basically represented by that 6th house moon as well. I didn't listen to Led Zeppelin or AC/DC, and I never got my head around lacrosse. I simply didn't fit in. But back in the neighborhood, I didn't quite fit in either. I didn't talk like the other kids or use the slang they did. My mother didn't even allow us to say ain't at home. My mom worked for the school board of Philadelphia, and she was a stickler for words. One day she heard me yell out to my friends, "Hey, where y'all gonna be at?" Her head whipped around in disbelief, like that girl from The Exorcist. "I hope they're going to be behind that preposition," my mom said. At Catholic school, no matter how well spoken or intelligent, I was still the Black kid. In Winfield, no matter how up I was on the latest music or fashion, I was never quite Black enough. I became one of the first hip hop artists who was considered safe enough for white audiences. But with Black audiences, I was labeled soft because I wasn't rapping about hardcore gangster shit. This racial dynamic is something that has plagued me in various forms throughout my entire life. But just like at home, performance and humor became my sword and shield. I was your classic class clown, telling jokes, making silly noises, being all around ridiculous. As long as I was the funny kid, it meant I wasn't just the Black kid. So let's see if he had, there it is. So he has Moon sextile Jupiter, and that's him telling the jokes, being the funny kid, all that, and that helped to get him through. Funny is colorblind. Comedy diffuses all negativity. It is impossible to be angry, hateful, or violent when you're doubling over laughing. But I started to notice that a joke that would kill Our Lady of Lourdes would garner blank stares in Winfield and vice versa. I realized that white people and Black people responded differently to my humor. My white friends tended to lean into my bigger, broader moments when I was light and silly and displayed a cartoon-like physicality. One of the white boys in Lourdes once tried to light his fart in the bathroom. I thought that was a little far to get a laugh, but it worked. They also liked puns and wordplay, witty sarcasm, and they demanded a happy ending. Everyone had to come out okay. My Black friends preferred their jokes more real and raw and demanded a gritty slice of truth at the core of the comedy. They saw my silliness as weakness. I would have got the whole shit kicked out of me if I tried to light a fart in Winfield. They responded better when my humor sprang from strength, from more of a battle mentality, put downs, insults, disses, and nothing played bigger than smashing somebody who was talking shit. They loved it when someone got what was coming to them. Karmic justice. Even if somebody was them, as Black people, we love laughing at ourselves. When we could joke about something, our pains, our problems, our tragedies, it makes them just a little bit more bearable. I learned to move between these two worlds. If I was making the kids on the corner laugh, I wasn't getting my ass kicked. If I was making the white kids at school laugh, I wasn't a nigger. If I was making daddy-o laugh, it meant my family was safe. I began to equate laughter with safety. The little scientists in my head started searching for what I called the number one answer. The number one answer is the perfect mythical joke that obliterates everyone who hears it, no matter their race, creed, color, age, nation of origin, sexual orientation. No one would be safe from the power of this joke. Throughout my career, and quite honestly, my entire life, this has been an obsession for me. I am forever seeking the perfect wording, the perfect tone of voice, the perfect delivery, the perfect physicality, the perfect swagginess, all of which will coalesce into a perfect moment of comedic nirvana and unalloyed human harmony. So you see how much he's focused on perfection. That's his Mars in Virgo, that's his Jupiter, Pluto, Uranus in Virgo, but also that sixth house energy he's dealing with Mercury, Venus, Moon, and Neptune. So he's very much about things being perfect. But despite my high aspirations, life at Our Lady of Lourdes grew more and more difficult. I've always been reluctant to ascribe the escalating issues between myself and the school to racism, the subtle forms of disrespect, the multiple suspensions in 7th and 8th grade, exclusions from parties and school events. I've often wondered if it was more about me being Baptist in a Catholic school than being Black in a white world. So let me see if I see any signs of him being excluded. He does have Moon and Neptune in quincunx with that Saturn. So in relation to school, that could deal with times where he was excluded, where he wasn't allowed to go to different parties and stuff. And that is other aspects that could deal with him being an outcast in school. The school wanted my parents to have me baptized Catholic, but they refused, even though doing so would have meant a 20% reduction in the yearly tuition. They knew that Lourdes was so much better academically than the local public schools, so they insisted that I tough it out. The breaking point came halfway through my 8th grade year. I played on my middle school football team, and I had proven myself as the top defensive back of the season, 17 interceptions in 10 games. I thought he said he wasn't athletic. Well, he does have that stellium in the 5th house, so that can point to some of his athleticism. He also has Saturn in Aries, North Node in Aries, Chiron in Aries. So I guess if, when he really tries, he can be athletic. Each year, the football team would have a banquet where all the players, parents, and the coaches hosted a dinner to honor the team at the end of the season. The kids who won awards were supposed to sit at the front, then walk up on stage to be recognized. Since I had the most interceptions on the team, I was set to receive my trophy, Defensive Player of the Year. And that's him very much moving towards that Aries North node, even at a young age. He said, I was set to receive my trophy, Defensive Player of the Year. But a week before the banquet, I was informed by Sister Agnes that because I had been suspended from school before the football season had even started, I wouldn't be allowed to sit up front or receive an award on stage. That's dealing with the quincunxes involving Moon, Neptune, and Saturn as well. I was disappointed, but I figured that was fair. It was a rule, and everybody knew I won anyway. But on the night of the banquet, I saw my white friend Ross Dempsey sitting at the front, preparing to receive his trophy, even though we had gotten suspended together. This injustice infuriated me. And he should be infuriated because that's going to cause him to move more towards that Aries North node. So times like that in his life, it had to happen for him to embody the traits of Aries. I leaned over to my mom and Daddy-O and told them what was going on. Without a word, they looked at each other, and in a moment of rare but potent agreement, they stood up and we left. We drove home that night in silence. A few days later, over dinner, without looking up from his meal, Daddy-O said, "We're done with that school." And that was that. That summer was hot. Business was booming and cash was flowing, so Daddy-O treated himself to a Kodak Super 8 home movie camera and projector. This was dope as hell. It had one of those big rubber eyepieces and a little leather strap for your wrist so you didn't drop the whole summer's worth of your money off of your back patio. Had Daddy-O grown up in a different time or place, he definitely would have been an artist. When he was a teenager, one of his school teachers loaned him a camera and he fell in love with photography. He ran all over North Philly snapping photos and later learned to develop film in a darkroom. But when it started to consume all of his time and attention, his parents and teachers reminded him that he needed to work and make money. Photography was an expensive hobby. So when he was sent to boarding school, they made him give the camera back. His heart was broken, but Daddy-O never lost his love for photography. His new Super 8 camera turned him into one of those dads, the kind who at birthday parties and barbecues would follow all the kids around filming everything they did, making us smile, do tricks, or be funny. Because the camera didn't have sound, he encouraged us to wildly over-exaggerate our movements, Charlie Chaplin style, to communicate his narrative without words. Daddy-O let go behind the camera. When there was work to be done, he was all about order and discipline. But when his camera was rolling, he wanted to see me jumping around and being silly. Now that 12th house placement of Saturn points to the father being all into his camera. I ate up the attention. You could not keep me out of his picture frame. Even when he was not trying to shoot me, I invented photo bombing. So he's taking credit for okay. After we shoot, Daddy-O would rush down into the basement, throw a sheet up on the wall, and carefully feed the delicate reels of the film into the projector. Following a series of frustrating snags and misfires, the sheet would suddenly light up. With us, a road trip here, a birthday party there. These were our family highlights. Daddy-O would sometimes play the guitar too. Glass of Chivas Regal on the side table, a Terryton 100 dangling out of his mouth, his eyes squinting from the dancing smoke. He picked the chords to Andy Williams' The Shadow of Your Smile, or attempts some intricate jazz riff that his working man's hands were just too battered to perfect. He'd pluck, strum, and even sing. It was always something romantic. Love songs seemed to put him in a good mood. My mom too. The music and home movies brought peace to the house. I think our home movies depicted Daddy-O's dream of a perfect, happy family. And by a strange alchemy, what was true on the screen became true in the basement as we all watched together. In every image, we were all smiling, laughing, and having fun. There was no fear, no tension, no violence. For those brief moments, Daddy-O's life imitated his art, and we all smiled and laughed and sang along. Psychologists have written about how our relationship with our parents in childhood and early adolescence creates our map for understanding love in adulthood. When we interact with our parents as children, some behaviors and attitudes win us attention and affection, and other behaviors and attitudes cause us to feel abandoned, unsafe, and unloved. The behaviors and attitudes that win us affection often come to define what we understand as love. Daddy-O appreciated when I worked hard and performed his directed orders with intensity and precision. He applauded when I was disciplined in laying a perfect brick toward the construction of a perfect wall. My mom loved when I used my brain. She applauded the thinker within me when my wit and intellect were most on display. My mom is my prototype. You are the prototype. Oh my God, I was jamming to that song last night. Patient, brilliant, formidable, nurturing. She preferred to do things together, but she's going to be fine with or without you. My mom can carry it all for a while if you need to take a break. With Gigi, there was something majestic and empowering about how she loved me. Whenever I performed for her, I felt like I was plugged into the force, like I couldn't lose. She was like the sun to me. If I could just make the world see me the way Gigi saw me when I played feelings, then that was it. That was the mountaintop. The concepts of love and performance became fused in my mind. Love became something earned by saying and doing the right things. In my mind, great performances got you love. Bad performances left you abandoned and alone. An exquisite performance secured affection. But if you sucked by your damn self. I performed to placate my father, to quell his fouler moods. I performed to distract my family from the growing tension and resentment that was consuming our home. So the performing started in his home. He got Leo on the 4th, again, performing to placate his father, but also performing to distract his family from the growing tension and resentment. That's very much Leo on the 4th. He said, I performed to get the kids in my neighborhood to like me. As such, I began to see happiness for myself and my loved ones as a function of my ability to perform. That sun in the 5th house as well, reinforcing the Leo theme, the performance theme. And again, as you can see, he got Jupiter, Pluto, Uranus, Sun, and South Node all in the 5th house. 5th house is performance. If I performed well, we would all be safe and happy. If my performance faltered, we were in trouble. Daddy-O was at his most loving, either behind a camera or projector. Therefore, I always wanted to be in front of his camera, and he always wanted me to be in front of it. It was one of the few times in my childhood where he and I were perfectly aligned. I loved being in my father's home movies. It brought me closer to him. And that deep craving for his love and approval undoubtedly played a role in my desire to perform on film later in life. Now, his Mars in Virgo is ruling that 12th house. With Mars in the 4th, again, that's reinforcing the camera theme and Will being in front of his father's camera. And basically, that's where he was really getting the love from his father. Throughout my life, I have been haunted by an agonizing sense that I am failing the woman I love. Over the years in my romantic relationships, I would always do too much. That's Sagittarius on the 7th, but then he got Jupiter in the 5th too, doing too much. Coddling, overprotecting, desperately trying to please them, even when they were totally fine. This insatiable desire to please manifested as an exhausting neediness. And that moon conjoining Neptune could cause him to do a lot for the woman he loves as well. Now, to me, love was a performance. So if you weren't clapping, I was failing. To succeed in love, the ones you care for must constantly applaud. Now, Will might be actually good in the bed. He might be a great lover with that Jupiter conjoined to Pluto in that 5th house. And again, he aims to please. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he knew how to put it down. And that's probably that probably sealed the deal for Jada after the money, the money sealed the deal really. But then the sex, because Jada is a sex fiend, that's where they bonded more than likely through sex. And I think that is the truth. Now, let me just read this part again. It says, to me, love was a performance. So if you weren't clapping, I was failing. To succeed in love, the ones you care for must constantly applaud. Spoiler alert, this is not a way to have healthy relationships. When I was 13 years old, Daddy-O hit my mom for the last time. Does he have anything at the 13th degree? So no, I don't see anything at the 13th degree. She went to work the next morning and didn't come home. She didn't go far, just a few blocks to Gigi's house. But the message was clear. She was done. This was the first of only 2 times in my life that I contemplated suicide. Damn. I'm not surprised with his moon in Scorpio ruling his 3rd, and then that moon conjoining Neptune. He said, I thought about pills. Moon conjoining Neptune. Where a boy had lost his legs on the train track. He said, I knew where a boy had lost his legs on the train tracks. I had seen people cut their wrists in a bathtub on TV. But what kept ringing in my mind was a faint memory of hearing Gigi say that killing yourself was a sin. Daddy-O reverted to full military protocols. He was now in absolute command. He was going to do it all. He woke up at 4 the next morning to prepare breakfast. He was determined to prove that he didn't need Mama. By 5:30, the plates were on the table. Half an apple, sunny side eggs, and a slice of scrapple. A pitcher of orange juice and a pitcher of milk. Mama never did pitchers. By 6, Ellen and I were sitting at the table. Harry knew he was supposed to be down by 6. I guess 6:04 was my brother's silent protest. Daddy-O let it go. He would never have ordinarily let it go. 6:04 would usually have meant no breakfast for Harry. The food had been sitting out for 30 minutes, so the eggs were cold, and the half apple was turning brown. Ellen and I ate quietly. The eggs are hard, Harry said. Daddy-O seemed to not even hear him. He was washing the dishes. Start clean, stay clean was one of Daddy-O's maxims. That's very Mars and Virgo in the 4th. He used it for cooking and at work. You clean up as you go along, not leaving one big mess for the end. Harry's nose turned up at the food. The apple is all brown. Please, Harry, just leave him alone. And what's this mess? Harry said, poking the scrapple with his finger. Without a word, Daddy-O snatched up Harry from the chair and carried him to the front door, opened it, and deposited Harry outside. He then handed Harry his book bag and slammed the door. I actually don't blame Daddy-O for that because Harry was out of pocket. Now, Harry didn't come home that day after school. He went to Gigi's house and moved in with Mama. When Harry left, it was just as painful for me as Mama leaving. I wanted to be with her too, but I was too scared to leave. It only solidified my deepest insecurity. I could no longer deny the truth. I was a coward. My mom lived at Gigi's for 3 years. We saw my mom every day. She would bring us lunch and we would stop by Gigi's sometimes to spend the night. The houses were close enough that we maintained our outward proximity, but on the inside, our family was broken. It was during this time that I began to escape into television. I found solace and joy in the perfectly crafted family narratives of my favorite sitcoms. Him escaping into television. Again, we go back to that moon, Neptune conjunction with the moon rule in the 3rd house. 3rd house is television, media. Happy Days, Good Times, The Brady Bunch, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, and Jack Tripper on the Three's Company was the truth. I idealized the families I saw on TV. They were doing exactly what I had been trying to do. They'd have a problem. Mr. Cunningham would be pissed. Richie would be scared. It would look bad for a moment, but then the Fonz would say something funny. Bang the jukebox, everybody laughed, and they all lived happily ever after. Yes, exactly. It's not that fucking hard. I wanted to be the happy-go-lucky teenager who always got along with his parents. I wanted to have a mother and father who loved each other. I wanted to live with 2 beautiful girls against Mr. Roper's rules. At a minimum, I felt I deserved a quirky alien who would come down from Ork and solve all my problems. He was talking about Mork and Mindy. I hated that show. Instead, I was trapped in chaos. But my biggest obsession as a kid was the television show Dallas. The Ewings were a large, wealthy Texas oil family led by JR, the iron-willed patriarch. He ruled the Ewing clan much like Daddy-O ruled the Smiths, except J.R. Ewing was hella rich. People give you a whole lot more leeway when your family compound has a name. That blew my mind. Their house had a name. South Fork was a 300-acre ranch in North Texas. The entire Ewing family, brothers, sisters, parents, grandparents, in-laws, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, everybody lived at South Fork. I wanted my whole family to live together like that. I will never forget the scene that changed my life. In retrospect, it was just a small moment. It was a normal sunny day in North Texas. The Ewing family was reassembling for the mandatory meal. They cut to an exterior shot of the palatial mansion, and Sue Ellen, JR's wife, came to breakfast on a horse. My young mind would never be the same. She came from her house on the property to the family house on the property on a fucking horse. To me, South Fork was heaven, a property where everybody's lives together, and my wife would come to breakfast on a fucking horse. Meanwhile, in the real world, I buried my shortcomings further under layers and layers of performance. I adopted a personality that was indefatigably cheery, upbeat, and positive. I responded to the dissonance of my world by remaining purely constant. I was always smiling, always fun and ready to laugh. Nothing wrong in my world. That's very Gemini rising, to let everything roll off your back. One day I would be in charge and everything was going to be perfect. We are going to have a big house on a huge property and everybody's going to live together and I'll take care of everybody. I would be the golden child, my mother's savior, my father's usurper. It was going to be the performance of a lifetime. And over the next 40 years, I would never break character, not once. And that makes me think of him being a Gemini rising with Mercury conjoined to Venus in Libra, when he's saying he would never break character and how he basically wanted to be his father's usurper. That's Mercury and Venus opposing his Saturn. So yeah, that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is entitled Power. So I'll be reading that in a few days. I don't know if I'm going to do a pre-recorded version or just go live. It all depends on how things are going. But yeah, what do y'all think? I would say chapter 3 is my least favorite so far. It wasn't that engrossing, I'll say. And it was my least favorite in terms of my reading. And kind of makes sense because I'm not really my usual self, I'll just say, because I got a lot going on today. But yeah, I'll do better next time. But yeah, so I'm still interested in this book. I'm looking forward to chapter 4, Power. Let me just bookmark this so be ready for next time. And yeah, so that's basically it for now. As you can see, we've been really hovering over that moon conjoined to Neptune, but it makes sense because he's recounting the early part of his life, which is very much dealing with that 3rd house, but also the 4th house. And then, like I said, the grandmother, now that she's more prominent in this book and her religious influence is evidenced by that 7th house when you take derivative houses into account, because that's the 10th house from the 10th. So that's pointing to his maternal grandmother. So Sagittarius on the 7th points to her being religious and the church influence through her and all that type of stuff. So stay tuned for part 4 or chapter 4. And stay tuned for a live stream for Aquarius season and one for Mars and Capricorn. And yeah, so that's it for now. Hope everybody's doing well. If you would like a reading, just go to my website and order one. The link is in the description. Please like and share. And if you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing. All right, I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.